Hey, how's it going? It's Carrie again with another rendition of Gardenside Chats. It's been a while since I've done a Gardenside Chat, so I'm excited to do one today. It's a lovely afternoon. Today we're going to talk just a little bit about bugs in the garden because, that's the reality of gardening is you're not just dealing with plants, you're dealing with insects and also other predators that are kind of going after the same produce that you're going for. So we practice at the urban farm and the agriculture park and all of the garden sites that we manage around town, something called integrative pest management, or IPM for short. Integrative pest management essentially refers to a collective strategy that's multifaceted that you implement against particular pests, and the collection of strategies is different depending on the pest you're talking about. So it's different for the crop and the pest. So one of the pests could be rabbits, or it could be birds even, or some sort of insect pest, and essentially it's multifaceted and it requires a lot of keen observation on your part as the gardener. So whenever we teach somebody how to garden and install a garden in their house for the first time, I always say, your garden is going to benefit the more you come out and look at it. So a hallmark of a great gardener is someone who's very observant and who kind of visits their plants every day and looks at them and sees how they look. Is it different than yesterday? Are there little insects running around? Are there holes on the plant? Is there discoloration? What is the context around, your garden? So keen observation is always the first step of integrative pest management. We also call that scouting. So you're scouting for pests and you're scouting for particular pest thresholds. So just because you see a cucumber beetle somewhere doesn't necessarily mean you gotta jump in with the spray. It just means you see a cucumber beetle and the next day maybe you see 2 and then the next day you see 3, and then after that keen observation and those scouting missions that the population is increasing and you need to do something about it. But kind of sitting back and watching, but also watching but knowing that you can make your move when it is necessary without kind of sitting back on your haunches. So scouting, first thing. After you scout and identify that something is definitely being detrimental to your plants, the next step is to identify what damage we're talking about. So in this case, if you want to pan down, these are some beans that we've got just kind of some, found shelving over. This is at my garden. This is actually my neighbor's patch of beans. So there's a couple different things going on. They have some holes in the leaves, as you can see, which could possibly come from a few different pests. But we also have a lot of bird damage in this garden. And so this kind of shelving will help keep the birds from eating these young bean plants. And that won't always. Another component of integrated pest management is knowing kind of the pest and plant life cycle and how they interact over a plant's life cycle. A lot of plants are very tender when they're young and small, and so you have to protect them more than when they're mature. So this cage will only be on them while they're pretty young, and once they get more sets of true leaves, he'll take them off because they're past kind of that danger of the birds coming in and pecking and tearing at the leaves. Also, we have rabbits, so rabbits love really young beans. They'll just mow them down, so this would help protect the beans through, rabbit predation. As the beans get taller, another thing about integrated pest management is, like I said, not sitting back on your haunches and moving quickly. So you're going to want to take this physical barrier off before all the beans get too big. Otherwise, it would be really hard. So yeah, this is something we call physical barrier. So it's physically keeping the pest away. We have another example of a physical barrier in our garden that another neighbor of mine implemented that I'll go show you. So let's head on over. So I'll kind of stand in the middle. You can see the strategy on either side of me. Where am I? I think I'm lost. Oh my gosh. Technical difficulties. One moment. Okay, so another strategy for physically keeping pests off of your plants is what's called floating row cover. Floating row cover is this white stuff you see around. These are actually peas. I'm not sure if you can tell that in the camera, but these are young peas. Well, not young anymore, but these are peas. You can kind of see them poking out through. And my neighbor has put this floating row cover over them, again to deter the birds from them. Floating row cover is good for a lot of different things. It physically keeps a lot of pests away from your plants, so they're great for squash bugs and, harlequin bugs, other insects. They're not perfect for every single insect, but they're good in, certain contexts. And they're also, and then of course in this case, birds. They're also really good for season extension, so you can kind of use them in the spring and the fall to keep your plants just a little bit warmer for a little bit longer, and kind of get the season started a little bit more. At the farm and at the ag park, we also utilize insect netting, which in like theory is very similar to the use of floating row cover, except it doesn't have as much of the warming capacities that the floating row cover does, but it physically keeps things like cucumber beetles, harlequin bugs, squash bugs, Japanese beetles, things off of our plants that will eat the plants. And it's really important when you're trying to keep insects in particular off of your plants with insect netting or floating row cover or something like that's wider, like bird netting or something, is that you make sure to weight it down perfectly. So you can kind of see, so this is for birds, so it doesn't need to be so perfect, but if this was for insects, we would want to weight it down all the way along the length and make sure that it wasn't like open and flapping like you can see over there, because you want to keep all of those openings shut and weighted down so that it's not flapping in the wind and an insect can just fly right in. That's how we use insect netting and floating row cover on a lot of our brassicas, like kale and collards, throughout the whole season, because there's a particular bug called a harlequin bug that's black and orange. I haven't seen any come out yet. Usually they're a later summer, early fall pest, but they really, really damage plants in the brassica family, especially in our experience, mustard greens, turnip greens, kale, and collard greens, which are things we grow a lot of. So the physical barrier of the floating row cover works really well for those larger kind of pests. Kind of in between these rows of peas, down there you see we have a heart trap, which is another component of our personal garden strategy for integrated pest management. We get raccoons, we get squirrels, we've gotten a whole bunch of different things in the heart trap that come in over our fence, even though we have a deer fence, which is kind of our first line of defense against all of the kind of mammalian pests in our garden. Some still can get in because it's not 100% invincible. Another strategy for integrated pest management to just deter pests without just straight up spraying pesticides on the garden is kind of scaring them off. So you might see over this cattle panel, we have some foil kind of blowing in the wind and it's shiny. So that somewhat deters other birds. They don't like the shiny nature. It kind of scares and confuses them. Sometimes things like that are effective all season. Sometimes the birds and the wildlife realize that it's not going to hurt them and it becomes less effective over time. So one thing about integrative pest management is you always have to be on your toes and change your strategies as you need to. So integrated pest management is just a host of of strategies that you implement against pests in your garden. It's not one strategy, it's many layers. It's our deer fence, our shelving over the plants, our row cover, our trapping, our companion planting, planting things that the insects or the mammals don't like to eat, that keep them kind of away from your garden. We have a lot of garlic planted around, or onions. They do really well in our garden, and those are usually considered pretty pests. They're kind of pungent, so pests are thought to not, especially insect pests, are thought to not like them as much, and they can be a good companion in your garden to just kind of like protect the things like tomatoes and greens and stuff that you really want to protect from your garden. When we do need to spray for insect pests, one thing I've done a lot here is we have flea beetles. We can go look at an example of flea beetle damage. So we'll head over this way. Flea beetles are really tiny little black beetles that chew shotgun-sized holes, not sized holes, but shotgun pattern holes in leaves. And they just, in doing so, lessen the amount of photosynthesis the plant can undertake, which generally weakens the plant's, immune system and energy and vigor. So it just kind of causes stunted plants. So in that case, row cover does not work against it, because flea beetles kind of live in the soil, and you're just trapping flea beetles in if you cover it with row cover. So what I did was I got diatomaceous earth, which is something that you can buy from Westlake's or most garden centers around town. And I put a little bit of the diatomaceous earth in a just normal water spray bottle and sprayed it on my plants. And I think they've gotten better since then. Some examples of flea beetle damage are on these leaves, these really tiny holes. And actually the plant is kind of like healing from them since I've been spraying it with diatomaceous earth. But you can see, and actually there's a flea beetle. Do you see it? There is one flea beetle. And maybe if I touch it, oh, I don't know if you can see. But they're called flea beetles because they jump really far, like fleas do. So here's another one. Let's see if I can. I don't know. I don't know if you can see that. What I did first, before just jumping in with the diatomaceous earth spray, I weeded around the plants really well. I thinned them so they got some air circulation, and that wasn't just like a kind of breeding ground that was protected for the flea beetles, but the damage was still happening. And so after I did those kind of first stages that I thought might, kind of make the plants sturdier on their own, I took the step to apply diatomaceous earth. Diatomaceous earth is a certified organic. You can get certified organic diatomaceous earth, and it's just a dried algae that cell walls are essentially like glass, and so it will the cell walls, the glass of the cell walls of the algae will kind of cut the exoskeleton and kind of just desiccate the insect, and so it's kind of a gnarly death, but and it's general, so it'll affect any insect with an exoskeleton. So you want to be kind of careful, because it could also kill beneficial insects, like beneficial parasitic wasps, for example, and that kind of thing. But I feel like I used it in a very specific manner, so I feel okay about what I did. Another thing is you just want diversity in your garden. So we don't have a lot of plants blooming in the garden right now, except our creeping Charlie that's almost always blooming, it seems. But you want flowers. Flowers are so important, and different colors of flowers, different flower structures. That just creates more insect diversity, because even beneficial insects like flowers. Everything likes nectar. So if you can see, I do have some bok choy right here, and I'm letting some of them flower. I purposefully did not harvest everything. So I always try to leave a little back that will flower and just provide some, quick carbohydrate source for the plant. Quick carbohydrate source for the insects, just because everything likes them, and the more diversity and the more kind of like things I can do to draw in insects in the garden means I will have inevitably some very specific predator insects that will predate on our pest insect populations. So integrated pest management, it's kind of a big term. It's kind of technical, it's kind of technical sounding, but the heart of the process is watch your plants, learn their life cycle, learn the pests that attack them at certain points in their life stage, and construct strategies that are multifaceted to protect your plants against these pests instead of just knee-jerk spraying. Integrated pest management relies on you knowing your garden, which is going to require you to visit your garden every day. I haven't visited my garden the last 2 days because it's been kind of rainy, and I've seen differences in the last 2 days since I've been here in the last 2 days. So the more you visit your garden, the more you look at your plants, the more you get down and see what insects are crawling around, the more you'll be able to protect your plants safely from pests, and then the more produce you will get from it. An easy way to figure out what if you see some damage on a plant and you just have no idea what caused it, because there's a whole world of pests out there. So what I would do is, the internet is a great resource, of course, for researching what pests are in your garden. So I would look at the damage to the leaf. So here's a real nice damaged baby kale leaf. So you see all those holes in it. So I'd look at the hole. First of all, I would also look around the plant to see if there's any insects around the plant that maybe I'll see some slugs and be like, oh, maybe I should see if slugs can eat holes in baby leaves. Answer, they do. So this could be some slug damage, could be some caterpillar damage. Also get real close and look at what's going on with the leaf. I actually see an aphid on this leaf. I don't know if you can see it. It's almost the same color as the leaf. There's an aphid right there hanging out. The aphid, I know this from being a gardener for a while, the aphid didn't make these big holes, but the aphid's still not good for the plant. It's sucking the juices out of the plant, so I don't like the aphid. So there's already something going on there. And then so I would go to Google and say, holes in kale leaf, pest, and see what comes up. And then you can click on images and see if the images kind of match. And then through that research, you can decide like, oh, it was a cabbage worm that ate the holes in my leaves, or it was probably slug damage. And then once you identify what pest did the damage, you can identify what your strategy to keep that pest out of your garden is. So you need to identify how your plant is damaged, what damaged it, and once you find out that, you can figure out how to protect your plants. So there's a whole world of insects, pests in the garden, disease, don't get deterred. It's a fun element to the garden. It keeps you on your toes. And really your best off, just visit your garden every day. Just keep an eye on everything, and that way you will be able to monitor how healthy everything is and what you need to do to keep everything healthy. So that's my spiel on garden pests. Got a lot of pests in my own garden. Just because I've been a gardener for 10 years does not mean I don't every day come out here and be like, oh, now I have aphids on my peppers. Or I've got flea beetles on my cilantro and my kale now. So it happens to everyone, and don't get deterred. Just identify what it is and identify how you can fix it. All right, thanks. We'll see you next week. Bye.